There are things you can see coming from a long way off, like a Pacific storm rolling in across the water, the sky turning heavy, the air changing before the first drop even falls. And then there are things that arrive with no warning at all, things that sit right next to you at the breakfast table for years and never once show their true face. I was sitting on the floor of our living room when I found out who I had actually married. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, and through the wide glass doors I could see the ocean doing what it always does, rolling and retreating, indifferent to everything happening on shore. In my hands I held 2 documents. One was a marriage certificate from the state of Oregon, dated more than 3 years before I ever met Ryan Carter. The other was the birth certificate of a boy named Ethan Ashford Carter, born 2 years before our first date, in a city Ryan had barely mentioned in all the time I had known him. My hands were steady. That was the strangest part. I remember looking down at my own fingers and thinking they should be shaking, that my body should be doing something dramatic to match the scale of what I had just learned. But there was nothing, just stillness, and the sound of waves through the glass, and the slow, quiet collapse of everything I thought I knew. I want to tell you how I got there. I want to tell you what I did next, because what happened after that moment is the reason I am still standing. If this story reaches you, wherever you are right now, and if something in it makes you feel less alone, then it was worth telling. Stay with me through the whole thing. I think you will understand why by the end. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 3 years ago I believed I was living the life I had always worked toward. I grew up in Baltimore, in a neighborhood called Remington, in a narrow brick row house with a leaking porch roof that my mother patched every spring with a stubbornness I only came to fully appreciate much later. My mother, Lorraine Mitchell, raised me on her own. She worked as an administrative assistant at a community health clinic for 22 years, the kind of job that never pays what it should, but keeps the world running anyway. She taught me to read before kindergarten, made sure I had library cards at every branch within bus distance, and told me, in her calm and direct way, that nobody was going to hand me anything in this world. But that did not mean the world had nothing for me. I believed her then, and I believe her now, though the path between those 2 points has not been a straight line. I studied graphic design at the Maryland Institute College of Art on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. After graduation, I spent 3 years working at a small branding agency in Baltimore, building a portfolio 1 project at a time, learning how to talk to clients who had more money than taste, and how to make their ideas look better than they deserved. When I was 25, I got an offer from a creative agency in Los Angeles, a real one, with actual benefits and a salary that meant I could stop checking my bank balance before buying groceries. I cried in the bathroom at work the day I accepted that offer, not because I was sad to leave, but because my mother had been right. Something was out there for me, and I had gone and found it. Los Angeles was enormous and loud and beautiful and indifferent in a way that Baltimore never was. In Baltimore, your neighbors know your business whether you want them to or not. In Los Angeles, you can disappear into the geography of the place, into the sprawl and the light and the traffic, and nobody notices unless you make them notice. I liked that at first. It felt like freedom. Later, I would understand that the same anonymity that felt like freedom could also be a perfect place to hide a lie. I met Ryan Carter at a networking event hosted by a tech company in Culver City, one of those rooftop gatherings where everyone holds a glass of something expensive and talks about synergy without any visible embarrassment. He was standing near the edge of the terrace, looking out at the skyline, and when I walked over to get away from a conversation about brand metrics, he turned and smiled at me with a warmth that felt genuine. He was tall, well-dressed without trying too hard, and he had this way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. He asked me questions about my work, about Baltimore, about what I missed most about the East Coast. He remembered every answer. Ryan was a marketing director at a mid-sized tech company, the kind of role that sounds impressive at dinner parties and pays well enough to fund a comfortable life in a city that demands comfort come at a premium. He was articulate, quick-witted, and generous in that early, effortless way that some people have, before the effort of maintaining a relationship reveals who they really are. We dated for 14 months before he proposed on a Tuesday evening in our apartment. No elaborate gesture, just the two of us on the couch with takeout containers on the coffee table, and a ring he pulled from his jacket pocket like he had been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. We got married at a courthouse in Santa Monica on a clear Thursday morning. My mother flew out from Baltimore. My best friend, Denise Holloway, stood beside me and cried more than I did. Ryan's family was smaller and more scattered. His parents had passed away years earlier, he said, in separate incidents he did not like to discuss, and the only family he mentioned with any regularity was his grandfather, Harold Carter, who lived in an assisted care facility east of Los Angeles. After the wedding, we moved into the apartment on Ocean Avenue. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a kitchen with a window above the sink that framed a slice of the Pacific, like a painting you could never quite believe was real. We had brunch on Saturdays at a place on Montana Avenue, where the avocado toast cost more than my first hourly wage in Baltimore, and I laughed about that every time because if you cannot laugh at the absurdity of spending that much on bread and fruit, you have lost something important about yourself. But I want to be honest with you, completely honest, because that is the only way this story means anything. Even in the good months, even in the best of what we had, there was something I could not quite name. A distance. Not the kind you can measure in miles or even in minutes of silence, but something more like a frequency, a low hum of disconnection that I could hear only when everything else went quiet. Ryan would answer a question about his day with a sentence that felt rehearsed. He would step out to take phone calls and come back with an explanation that was technically plausible, but somehow too smooth. Like a surface that has been sanded so many times, it no longer has any grain. I told myself that all long-term relationships have stretches like that. I told myself that intimacy does not mean constant transparency, that everyone is entitled to an interior life. Denise, who has a talent for saying the uncomfortable thing at exactly the right time, once looked at me across a table at our favorite coffee shop in Venice and said, "Sarah, you are making excuses for a feeling you should be listening to." I told her she was being dramatic. I told her Ryan was a good man. I told her I was happy. I was not lying. Not exactly. I was just telling the version of the truth that let me keep the life I had built. The life that looked so much like the one I had imagined for myself when I was 22 and packing boxes in my mother's living room in Baltimore, dreaming about what waited for me on the other side of the country. It is a powerful thing, the life you think you are supposed to have. It can make you blind to the life you are actually living. The visit to the care facility happened on a Sunday in late September. Ryan drove. The facility was in Pasadena, a clean, quiet place surrounded by jacaranda trees that were past their bloom, the last of the purple flowers drying on the sidewalks like confetti from a celebration no one could remember. Ryan visited his grandfather about once a month, sometimes less. I had been with him a handful of times before, but Mr. Carter's condition had worsened steadily over the past year, and the visits had become shorter and harder. Harold Carter was 86 years old, a former electrician with large hands and pale blue eyes that still held a sharpness even when the rest of his mind had gone soft around the edges. He sat in a wheelchair near the window of his room, a blanket across his lap despite the warmth of the afternoon. When we walked in, he looked at Ryan and said his name correctly, which Ryan told me later was becoming less and less common. Ryan sat with him for about 15 minutes, making small talk that his grandfather drifted in and out of. Then a nurse came to the door and said the attending physician wanted to speak with Ryan about a change in medication. Ryan squeezed his grandfather's shoulder, told me he would be right back, and left the room. I sat down in the chair next to Mr. Carter. The room smelled like antiseptic and something floral, air freshener maybe, layered over the plain institutional smell of clean linens and recycled air. I was scrolling through my phone when I felt his hand on mine. His grip was surprisingly strong. I looked up, and his eyes were focused in a way I had not seen before, locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You are not the same one," he said. I smiled, the way you do when someone with Alzheimer says something that does not quite connect, gently, without contradiction. "It is me, Mr. Carter. Sarah." He shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. "No. The other one. The wife. She had light hair. She was patient. More patient than you would think, for how young she was." I felt something cold move through my chest, not understanding yet, just reacting to his tone, to the urgency in his grip. "Ryan left her," he continued, his voice dropping to something between a whisper and a confession. "Right after the baby came. That boy. That little boy. Why did he do that? Why did he leave that baby?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. His eyes were wet now, and he squeezed my hand harder. "You tell him," he said. "You tell him he needs to go back. A man does not leave his child." Then, just as suddenly, the clarity drained from his face. His grip loosened. He turned back toward the window and began murmuring something I could not make out. His attention already elsewhere, already lost again in whatever landscape his mind had retreated to. I sat there for what felt like a very long time. My phone was still in my other hand. The screen had gone dark. When Ryan came back, he was casual, easy, the way he always was after these visits, like a man stepping out of one room and into another without carrying anything between them. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Your grandfather said some things," I said carefully, "about a woman, a wife, and a baby." Ryan exhaled through his nose, a small, controlled breath. He did not look alarmed. He looked, if anything, mildly inconvenienced. "He does that," he said. "He mixes up people, timelines. Last month he thought I was his brother who died in 1987. He put his hand on my back as we walked to the car. "It is the disease, Sarah. You know that." I nodded. I said I understood. We drove back to Santa Monica along the freeway, and Ryan turned on a podcast about market trends, and the voice of the host filled the space between us like a wall built out of sound. But something had changed. Not dramatically, not like a door slamming shut or a light switching off. It was more like a crack in a window you have looked through every day for years, a hairline fracture you cannot unsee once you have noticed it, one that changes the way the light falls on everything inside. That night, while Ryan slept beside me, I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and replayed every word Harold Carter had said. The other wife, light hair, the baby. Why did he leave that baby? I told myself it was the disease. I told myself that confused memories are not evidence of anything. I told myself to let it go. But I could not, because there had been something in the old man's voice that did not sound confused at all. It sounded like grief. And grief, I have learned, does not lie. It does not need to. It has no reason to. The days after that visit moved at two different speeds. On the surface, everything was normal. I went to work, sat in meetings about color palettes and client presentations, ate lunch at my desk, smiled at colleagues. Ryan and I cooked dinner together on Tuesday, ordered Thai food on Wednesday, watched a documentary on Thursday that he picked because he knew I liked anything about the sea. If you had filmed our life that week and shown it to a stranger, they would have said, we looked happy. But underneath that smooth surface, Something was working in me the way water works on stone, slowly, reshaping everything it touches without making a sound. I could not stop thinking about Mr. Carter's words, not just what he said, but how he said it. The grip on my hand, the sharpness in his eyes, the urgency. I started noticing things, not new things. That is what unsettled me. Things that had always been there. Ryan's phone, always face down on every surface. His thumb moving to the lock button whenever I walked into a room while he was texting. His work trips, once or twice a month, to cities that were always plausible, but described in terms that were always vague. He would say the conference went well, the meetings were productive, but he never mentioned specific people or specific moments. It was all surface, all smooth. And then there was the drawer. In our second bedroom, which Ryan used as a home office, there was a walnut desk with 3 drawers on the right side. The bottom one had a small brass lock, and it was always locked. I had asked about it once, early in our marriage. He said it held old tax documents and personal things from his parents that he was not ready to go through. I had not asked again, because I believed love included giving someone room to hold things privately. Now I wondered what that respect had cost me. I called Denise that evening. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does. Denise Holloway and I had been close since my first year in Los Angeles. She was a paralegal at a family law firm in Century City, originally from Oakland, 5 years older than me and immeasurably wiser about the ways people behave when they think no one is watching. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a gaze that could empty one. "Tell me exactly what the old man said," she told me. "Oh, word for word." I did. There was a long silence when I finished. "Sarah," she said, her voice halfway between compassion and steel, "I am not going to tell you what to think, but I will tell you what I would do if I were sitting where you are." "I know what you would do." "Then why are you calling me instead of doing it?" "Because I am afraid of what I might find." "That is exactly why you need to look." She was right. That night, I lay beside Ryan and thought about all the different kinds of silence, the comfortable kind, the companionable kind, and the kind that exists because someone is holding a secret so large it has swallowed all the available air in the room. I started on Saturday morning. Ryan left early for a basketball game with friends. Whether that was true or not, it gave me the apartment to myself. I began with what I could access without force. Our filing cabinet in the hallway closet contained the documents of our shared existence: lease agreement, insurance policies, joint bank statements. I pulled everything out and laid it on the living room floor, working through it the way I approach a design project, looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for the thing that does not match. The joint statements were clean, but I remembered something. When we first combined our finances, Ryan had mentioned keeping one personal account open for what he called legacy expenses related to his parents' estate. I had not questioned it, and I had once glimpsed a statement from that account sitting on top of his mail pile, months earlier, just a brief glance. What I remembered now was a line item, a recurring monthly payment of $800 to a name starting with A. $800 a month is not a legacy expense. $800 a month is a commitment to a living person. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and navigated to the public records website for Multnomah County, Oregon. Ryan had mentioned Portland a couple of times in passing, a restaurant he liked, a bridge he thought was beautiful. It was not much, but when someone guards their past as carefully as Ryan did, even small details become significant. I typed his full name, Ryan James Carter, selected marriage records. One result, marriage certificate. Ryan James Carter and Megan Elizabeth Ashford, filed in Multnomah County, Oregon. The date was 4 years and 7 months before Ryan and I stood in that courthouse in Santa Monica. I searched for a divorce decree. Tried every variation, every filing window, every adjacent county. Nothing. Then I searched birth records. Ethan Ashford Carter, born in Portland. Mother, Megan Elizabeth Ashford. Father, Ryan James Carter. Mr. Carter had not been confused. His mind, in that brief window of clarity, had done what the truth always does when it finds an opening. It came through. I closed the laptop gently, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the cold tile, and cried. Not loudly, just a quiet, steady release of something that had been building for longer than I wanted to admit. Because the tears were not only about what I had discovered. They were about all the years I had spent telling myself not to look, not to ask, not to listen to the voice inside me that knew something was wrong. When the tears stopped, I washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and made a decision. I was not going to confront Ryan. Not yet. He was intelligent, persuasive. He had a gift for reshaping reality with words, for making you doubt what you had seen with your own eyes. If I went to him now, emotional and unprepared, he would find a way to explain it, turn it into a misunderstanding, a technicality. He would make me feel unreasonable. No. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it properly. When Ryan came home that afternoon, I smiled. Asked about the game. He said his team won by 3. I handed him a glass of water. We talked about dinner, and the whole time I could feel the weight of what I knew sitting between us like a third person in the room, invisible and enormous. Monday, I called Denise from my car and told her everything. She did not gasp. She did not say I told you so. She said, "You need a lawyer, a good one. I know someone." Patricia Owens, senior partner at a family law firm in West Los Angeles. Denise described her as someone who combined the precision of a surgeon with the patience of a person who has spent decades watching people lie under oath. I made an appointment for Thursday. Told Ryan I had a dentist appointment. It was the first deliberate lie I had ever told him in our marriage. Patricia's office was on the 12th floor of a glass building on Wilshire Boulevard. She was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. When I laid out the printouts from the county records website, she studied each one carefully and then looked at me with an expression that was not surprised, but deeply serious. "If these records are accurate and there is no dissolution on file, then your marriage to Mr. Carter is voidable under California law. A bigamous marriage can be annulled. And depending on what he knew and when, there may be additional consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "Bigamy is a criminal offense in California, rarely prosecuted but on the books. More practically, you would be entitled to an annulment, and there may be grounds for financial restitution." Restitution, as if there were a dollar amount that could restore the years I had spent building a life on a foundation that did not exist. "I recommend you gather as much documentation as possible before taking any formal action," Patricia continued. "Bank records, communication records, anything establishing the timeline. And I strongly recommend you do not confront him until you are fully prepared. People who maintain deceptions of this scale are typically very skilled at managing confrontation." That last sentence stayed with me as I drove home along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean gleaming in the late afternoon light, like it was trying to remind me that beauty and deception can occupy the same frame without any apparent contradiction. That evening, after Ryan fell asleep, I searched for Megan Elizabeth Ashford online. It did not take long. Her profile picture showed a woman with light brown hair, about my age, standing in a garden with a careful, measured smile that did not quite reach her eyes, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who has learned to be cautious about what she shows the world. I did not message her that night, but I saved her profile and sat in the dark and listened to the ocean and tried to reconcile the man sleeping in the next room with the man who had left a woman and a child in Portland and then walked into a courthouse and sworn an oath he had no legal right to swear. It took me 4 days to write the message. I drafted and deleted it at least a dozen times. In the end, I kept it simple. My name, my marriage to Ryan, the records I had found, a request to speak, whenever she felt comfortable, my phone number. She called the next evening. I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot because I did not want to be in the apartment. Did not want Ryan walking in during this conversation. The sun was going down, the sky turning pink and gold the way it does in Los Angeles in autumn. "Sarah," she said, her voice steady but thin, like a wire pulled taut. "I have been wondering for years if this call would come." What followed was one of the most painful conversations of my life. Megan had met Ryan in Portland when she was 23. They dated for a year and married in a small ceremony. She got pregnant quickly. Ryan seemed happy at first. But after Ethan was born, he became distant. He started traveling more. Then the trips got longer. Then there were weeks when he barely came home. "He did not leave in one dramatic moment," she said. "He left in increments. A little more distance every week until one day I realized I was raising Ethan alone, and Ryan was just a name on a bank transfer that arrived sometimes and sometimes did not." She had tried to file for divorce, but Ryan had been unresponsive, had moved without a forwarding address, had made himself unreachable. She eventually stopped trying. She had a child to raise, and only so much energy to spend on a man who had made it clear through his absence that he considered their marriage over in every way that mattered to him. "The payment stopped completely about 2 years ago," she said. "I do not even know where he is." "He is here," I said, "in Santa Monica, marketing director, Ocean View apartment." The words tasted bitter and absurd. Megan was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had something harder in it, something forged. "Ethan is 6 years old. He asks about his father sometimes. I never know what to say." I leaned my head against the car seat. Through the windshield, the parking lot lights were flickering on. "Megan," I said, "I am going to make this right. I do not know exactly how yet, but I am going to make this right." She did not say she believed me. She just said, "Okay," in a voice that carried the weight of years of waiting for someone to say those words and mean them. I drove home. Ryan was on the couch watching basketball. He asked if I remembered the olive oil. I said I had. I put the groceries away, stood at the kitchen sink, and looked out at the dark ocean, thinking about a little boy in Portland who asked about his father and never got an answer that was good enough. And I thought about the woman I had been 6 weeks ago, the one who ate expensive avocado toast on Saturdays and told herself the distance in her marriage was normal. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone I was still getting to know, someone frightened and furious and determined in equal measure, someone who had decided the truth was worth more than comfort, even when comfort was all she had ever wanted. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life, and I say that as someone who moved across the country alone at 25, with 2 suitcases and a contact list that fit on a single page. But loneliness when you are lying next to someone every night, sharing meals, sharing a bathroom, sharing the ordinary choreography of a life built for 2, that is a different species entirely. That kind of loneliness has teeth. Every morning, I woke up next to Ryan and performed the role of wife with a precision that surprised me. I smiled at the right moments, asked about his day with the right amount of interest, laughed at his jokes. Because that is the thing about people who deceive you. They are not villains every minute of every day. They have qualities you fell in love with for real reasons, and those qualities do not disappear just because you have discovered the lie underneath. You cannot simply hate someone whose laugh still makes you smile against your will, but underneath the performance, I was working, quietly, methodically. Patricia had given me a list of documents to gather, and I treated it the way I treat a design brief at work, a set of problems to solve, one at a time, in the right order. Over 3 weeks, I intercepted 2 paper statements from Ryan's personal bank account before he could collect the mail. I know how that sounds, but my marriage was built on a legal impossibility. The man I shared a bed with had abandoned a child, and my entire understanding of my own life was based on information that had been carefully edited to serve someone else's narrative. The gray area was a place I could live with. The statements confirmed what I suspected. Recurring payments of $800 a month to an account under the name M. Ashford, consistent for about 2 years after Ethan's birth, then irregular, shrinking, and eventually stopping altogether. There were also payments to a storage facility in Portland, which meant Ryan still had physical belongings from his previous life, sitting in a rented unit hundreds of miles away. A life he had boxed up, but never closed. I photographed every page, stored the images in a password-protected cloud account Ryan did not know existed. Patricia had taught me the importance of redundancy. Documents disappear, she had said. People who are good at hiding things are good at destroying evidence when they feel the walls closing in. I spread everything out on Denise's dining table on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Her apartment in Culver City smelled like the cardamom tea she was perpetually brewing. The marriage certificate, the birth certificate, the bank statements. A timeline I had constructed mapping Ryan's claims against verifiable facts. Denise studied each page in silence, the way the lawyers she works with read documents, line by line, expression neutral. When she finished, she looked at me. "How are you holding up?" The gentleness in her voice nearly broke me, because I had been so focused on the task that I had not allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I was carrying. "Some mornings I am furious," I said. "Other mornings I just feel foolish, like the signs were all there and I chose to look away." "You did not choose to look away. You chose to trust your husband, which is what you were supposed to be able to do. The failure here is not yours." I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. But another part whispered that I had been complicit in my own deception, not because I had known the truth, but because I had worked so hard to avoid knowing it. The following weekend, I called my mother. Lorraine Mitchell is not a woman who panics. She listens before she speaks and asks questions before she reacts. I called her on a Saturday morning, sitting on the balcony with the door closed. Ryan was at the gym, or wherever he actually went when he said he was at the gym. The ocean was flat and silver under an overcast sky. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen before you say anything." "All right," she said. And she did. I told her everything. When I finished, the line was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke. "Sarah, are you safe?" It was not the question I expected, and it hit me harder than anything else she could have said, because it took everything out of the realm of betrayal and placed it in the territory of my safety, which I had not seriously considered. "Yes, he has never been violent." "There are many kinds of danger," my mother said. "Not all of them leave marks you can see." She did not tell me to leave or stay. She told me she loved me, that she was proud of me for looking at something painful instead of turning away, and that when I was ready, she would be on the next flight. Then she said something I carry with me to this day. "You spent your whole life earning everything you have, your education, your career, your place in that city. None of that belongs to him. None of that came from him. Remember that." After we hung up, I sat on the balcony and watched the clouds move over the water and felt, for the first time in weeks, something other than fear. Not confidence exactly. More like clarity. The kind that comes when you stop trying to make a broken thing work and start figuring out how to walk away with as much of yourself intact as possible. That same week, I visited Mr. Carter again. Alone. The facility was quieter than I remembered. The jacaranda trees were fully bare, their branches sketching dark lines against a pale November sky. He was in the common room near a window, a blanket across his lap, a cup of something warm beside him. When I sat down, he looked at me and smiled. A real smile. He said my name. Sarah. Not the other woman's name. Mine. You came back, he said. I did. Ryan is not with you. No, not today. He nodded slowly. We sat together for about 40 minutes, mostly quiet. He drifted in and out of awareness, but at one point during a stretch of lucidity, he looked at me and said, "He was not always like this, you know." Like what? Afraid. He was not always afraid. He did not elaborate, but that word stayed with me. Afraid. It was not a word I would have associated with Ryan, who moved through the world with a confidence that bordered on performance. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the confidence was the performance, and underneath it was a man who had been running from something for so long he had forgotten there was any other way to move. I want you to understand something. I did not set out to destroy Ryan Carter. I did not want revenge. What I wanted was the truth, fully and publicly acknowledged, in a space where it could not be edited or softened. Ryan had spent years controlling the narrative in private, and I had learned the hard way that private confrontation was his home territory, the place where his charm gave him every advantage. Then, without knowing it, he handed me exactly what I needed. It was a Thursday evening in early December. We were on the couch, the television on but neither of us watching, when Ryan turned to me with that smile he reserved for moments when he was about to present a decision, as though it were a suggestion. Our anniversary is coming up. 3 years. I want to book a dinner at Marisol, that place on the boardwalk. Private dining area, ocean view, some friends, some people from work. Make a night of it. He took my hand. You deserve it. The warmth of his hand felt exactly the same as always, and that was perhaps the cruelest detail of all, that the body of the person deceiving you offers no physical signal that something is wrong. That sounds wonderful, I said, and I meant it, though not for the reasons he imagined. The next morning, I called Denise. I need you there. I would not miss it. What are you going to do? Tell the truth, in front of everyone. Then I called Megan. This was harder. I was asking a woman who had been abandoned to walk back into Ryan's orbit voluntarily, to stand in a room full of strangers and claim her own story. I told her about the dinner and what I was planning. I told her she did not have to come. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear Ethan in the background, his voice high and bright. He should know his father's face, she said finally. Not Ethan. Not yet. But the people in Ryan's life should know Ethan exists. They should know what he did. You do not have to do this for me. I am not doing it for you. I am doing it for me and for my son. I have been invisible in this story for 6 years. I am done being invisible. We made arrangements. Megan would fly down from Portland the morning of the dinner. Denise would meet her at the airport and bring her to the restaurant at the right moment. Patricia reviewed my plan and confirmed nothing crossed any legal line. I was not making accusations or filing charges. I was presenting documented facts in a social setting and allowing them to speak. I spent the next 12 days living inside a performance so convincing it frightened me. I went to work, came home, cooked with Ryan, let him hold me at night. Every moment felt like standing in 2 places at once. 1 foot in the life I had known and 1 in the life waiting on the other side of the truth. I prepared a folder. Copies of every document, the Oregon marriage certificate, Ethan's birth certificate, the bank statements, the storage facility records, a printed timeline mapping Ryan's claims against verifiable facts. The folder was slim, unremarkable, like something you might carry to a work meeting. But it contained the complete documented disassembly of a lie that had lasted nearly a decade. 2 nights before the dinner, I could not sleep. I stood at the glass doors watching moonlight on the water and felt something close to calm. Not peace, but the stillness that comes when you have made a decision and there is nothing left to do but follow through. I thought about my mother in Baltimore, about Denise, about Megan packing a suitcase in Portland, about Mr. Harold Carter in his wheelchair, who had given me the truth in a moment of clarity his grandson had spent years trying to prevent. None of this was luck or chance. It was choices. Mine and Megan's and Denise's and Patricia's. Choices made by women who decided the truth mattered more than comfort, more than appearances, more than the exhausting work of pretending everything was fine. The morning of the dinner, I stood in the shower and thought about the woman I had been on my wedding day, standing in that courthouse in a cream-colored dress, believing every word of every promise. I did not feel sorry for her. I felt grateful, because she had loved honestly, even if she had loved someone who did not deserve it. And I felt proud of the woman standing here now, the one who had done the hard, unglamorous work of uncovering the truth. I dried my hair, put on a dark blue dress, simple and elegant, looked at my reflection and took a breath. Tonight the story would change, not through cruelty or spectacle, but through the simple, devastating power of facts spoken aloud in a room where they could not be denied. Marisol sat at the edge of the Santa Monica boardwalk like a jewel in a velvet case. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean, warm lighting, the kind of place where the menus do not have prices because the assumption is that if you need to ask, you are at the wrong table. Ryan had reserved the private dining area on the second floor, a long room with exposed brick on one wall and the Pacific filling the other like a living painting, dark blue and restless under the early evening sky. I arrived with Ryan at 7. He was wearing a charcoal suit I had helped him pick out 2 months earlier, back when helping him choose a suit felt like an act of love instead of something closer to costume design for a character in a story I was about to end. The guests were already gathering. About 20 people, colleagues from Ryan's company, a few friends from our social circle, 2 couples we occasionally had dinner with. Everyone dressed well, smiling, holding glasses of wine and sparkling water, filling the room with the pleasant hum of people who believe they are there for a celebration. Denise arrived at 7:15. She wore black, which I would later realize was either a coincidence or the most Denise thing she had ever done. She hugged me, squeezed my hand twice, which was our agreed signal that Megan had landed safely and was nearby. Ready. Ryan was in his element. He moved through the room the way he moved through every social space, with ease and warmth and that particular magnetism that made people feel seen. He shook hands firmly. He remembered names, asked about children, complimented a colleague's new haircut with exactly the right amount of sincerity. Watching him work the room, I understood something with painful clarity. This was not a man who occasionally lied. This was a man who had built an entire identity out of selective truth, and he was so good at it that even I, standing there with a folder of evidence in my bag, could almost believe the version of himself he was performing. Dinner was served at 7:45, sea bass, roasted vegetables, a wine that Ryan had selected in advance and described to the table with the easy authority of someone who has learned just enough about wine to sound impressive without being tedious. The food was beautiful. I barely tasted it. At 8:30, Ryan stood up. He tapped his glass with a fork, and the room quieted. He looked around the table with that smile, the one I had fallen in love with. The one that made you feel like you were the only person in his world. 3 years ago, he began, I married the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Sarah, you have made me a better man. You have given me a life I did not know I was allowed to want. And I stand here tonight, in front of the people who matter most to us, to say that I am grateful for every single day. Applause, warm smiles around the table. Someone raised a glass. I let the moment settle, let the echo of his words hang in the air like perfume. Then I stood up. "Thank you, Ryan," I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced this in my bathroom mirror, in my car, in Denise's living room. Not the exact words, but the tone. Calm, clear, unshakable. And thank you all for being here tonight. It means more than you know to be surrounded by people who care about honesty and trust. I paused. Let those 2 words land. I also have something to share this evening. A few months ago, Ryan and I visited his grandfather, Mr. Harold Carter, at his care facility in Pasadena. Most of you know that Mr. Carter has Alzheimer's. What you may not know is that during that visit, while Ryan was out of the room, his grandfather had a moment of remarkable clarity. The room was very still. Ryan's smile had not disappeared, but it had frozen, the way a screen freezes when the system behind it stops responding. He took my hand, I continued, and he told me about a woman, a wife. He described her, light hair, young, patient. And he told me about a baby. He asked me why Ryan had left them. Murmurs, a few exchanged glances. Ryan let out a small laugh, the kind designed to signal that something is not serious. "My grandfather has Alzheimer's," he said, still smiling, his voice light. "He confuses people in timelines constantly. Sarah, honey, we have talked about this." "We have," I said. "And you told me it was the disease. So I decided to find out for myself." I reached into my bag and took out the folder. Opened it on the table in front of me. This is a marriage certificate from Multnomah County, Oregon. It records the marriage of Ryan James Carter to Megan Elizabeth Ashford, filed 4 years before Ryan and I were married. I placed it on the table. This is the birth certificate of their son, Ethan Ashford Carter, born in Portland. I placed it beside the first document. And this is the result of my search for a divorce decree between them. I looked at Ryan. There is none. Ryan never divorced his first wife, which means that our marriage, the one we are celebrating tonight, is not legally valid. The silence in the room was absolute. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that rings. Ryan's face went through several stages in the space of a few seconds. Surprise, then calculation, then something that looked almost like relief, as though a weight he had been carrying for years had finally been set down, even if it had been set down in the worst possible place. Then he recovered, because Ryan always recovered. "Sarah, this is not the time or place for—" "There is one more thing," I said. The door to the private dining room opened. Denise stepped aside, and Megan Ashford walked in. She was smaller than I had imagined. Light brown hair pulled back. A simple gray coat. She looked nervous but resolute, the way someone looks when they have spent a long time building up the courage to walk into a room they have every right to enter. The table turned. 20 faces, all looking at this woman none of them had ever seen before. "This is Megan Ashford," I said, "Ryan's wife, his legal, still married wife, and the mother of his 6-year-old son." Megan stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I am not here to make a scene. I am here because my son deserves to exist in his father's life, even if his father chose to pretend he did not. Ryan left us when Ethan was 8 months old. He disappeared. He stopped sending support. And apparently, he started a new life and a new marriage without ever ending ours." Ryan stood. His chair scraped against the floor. For the first time since I had known him, he had nothing to say. His mouth opened, closed. He looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues and friends, all watching him with expressions that ranged from shock to slow, dawning understanding. "This is not what it looks like," he finally said. But the words came out hollow, automatic, a reflex without conviction. "It is exactly what it looks like," I said. "And I have not come to this moment out of cruelty. I have come because you are a man who is very good at telling his version of the truth behind closed doors, and I decided that the truth deserved a room with witnesses. I closed the folder, picked up my bag. Our marriage is being annulled. My attorney has already begun the process. I wish you well, Ryan. I genuinely do. But I will not spend another day living inside a story that was never real. Denise was at my side. Megan stepped back toward the door. The three of us walked out of that room together, down the stairs, through the restaurant, and into the cool December night. The ocean was right there, dark and vast, and the salt air hit my face like a hand waking me from a long, disoriented sleep. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the three of us, and nobody spoke. Then Megan looked at me and said, "Thank you." "You were the brave one," I said. "You got on that plane." Denise put one arm around my shoulder and one around Megan's, and we stood there in the cold until our breathing slowed, until the shaking in my hands subsided, until the night felt like something I could move through instead of something pressing down on me. The days after the dinner were quiet in the way that follows a storm. Not peaceful, but still. Ryan called 7 times the first day. I did not answer. He sent messages that oscillated between apology and justification. "You do not understand the whole picture. I was going to tell you. Megan and I were over long before I met you." Each message was a variation of the same thing, an attempt to rewrite the story, to position himself as a flawed but well-meaning man caught in complicated circumstances, rather than someone who had deliberately constructed a second life on top of an unresolved first one. I did not respond, not out of spite, but because I had learned that engaging with Ryan on his terms meant being pulled into a conversation where the facts would slowly bend until they no longer resembled what had actually happened. Silence was the only language he could not manipulate. Patricia moved quickly. The annulment filing was straightforward given the documentation. She also connected Megan with a family law attorney in Oregon who began proceedings for retroactive child support. The financial records I had gathered, the bank statements showing years of sporadic and eventually abandoned payments, became the foundation of Megan's case. I moved out of the apartment on Ocean Avenue on a Tuesday morning while Ryan was at work. Denise helped me pack. It took less time than I expected, which tells you something about how much of that apartment had actually been mine versus how much had been the set design for a life that belonged to someone else's script. I took my clothes, my books, my design supplies, a few kitchen items I had brought from Baltimore. I left the furniture, the art, the view. None of it was mine in any way that mattered. My mother flew in from Baltimore that weekend. She arrived at the small furnished studio I had rented in Mar Vista, looked around at the bare walls and the single window facing a courtyard garden, set her suitcase down, and said, "This is a good room. It has good light." That was Lorraine Mitchell. No dramatics, no pity. Just an honest assessment of the available light. She stayed for 2 weeks. She cooked meals I had not eaten since childhood. Simple things, rice and beans and roasted chicken, the food of a life that had been real and solid and earned. We did not talk about Ryan constantly. She asked me questions when I wanted to talk, and sat with me in comfortable silence when I did not. One evening, sitting on the small couch with plates on our laps, she looked at me and said, "You know, when you were little, you used to rearrange your room every few months, moved everything around until it felt right. Drove me out of my mind, but you always knew when something was in the wrong place." I laughed for the first time in weeks. It came out rusty, surprised, like a door being opened in a house that had been closed up too long. Going back to work was both harder and easier than I expected. A few colleagues who had been at the dinner approached me with careful kindness. Nobody asked for details. One woman from my team left a coffee on my desk with a note that said, "Glad you are here." That small gesture meant more to me than any grand statement of support could have. I worked. I designed. I sat in meetings and talked about typefaces and brand identity and client expectations, and the normalcy of it was like a rope I could hold on to while the rest of my life rearranged itself around me. My work had always been mine, built by my own hands, and no revelation about Ryan could change what I was capable of creating. The cost of all of it was real, though. I want to be honest about that. There were nights in that studio apartment when I lay in the dark and felt the full weight of what I had lost. Not Ryan himself, but the future I had imagined, the plans we had made, the version of my life that had felt stable and earned and permanent. Grief does not care whether the thing you lost was real or illusory. It arrives either way, heavy and uninvited, and it stays until it is ready to leave. But there were also mornings when I woke up, and the first thing I felt was not sadness but relief. The relief of no longer performing. The relief of no longer scanning every sentence for hidden meanings. No longer lying next to someone and wondering which version of them was real. The relief of living in a small bare room that contained nothing false. 5 months passed. 5 months of learning how to live inside a life that was entirely, unmistakably mine. It was not always comfortable. Comfort, I had learned, is sometimes just the name we give to familiar patterns, even when those patterns are slowly dismantling us from the inside. What replaced comfort was something less smooth, but infinitely more solid. It felt like standing on ground that would hold my weight, even if the view from there was not as impressive as the one from an apartment on Ocean Avenue. The studio in Mar Vista became something I had not expected. It became home. Not because it was beautiful, though the courtyard garden outside my window had a lemon tree that caught the afternoon light in a way that made me stop and look every single day. It became home because everything in it was chosen. Every object, every arrangement, every small decision about where to place a lamp or hang a print reflected someone who was no longer decorating a life to match someone else's expectations. The walls were mostly bare for the first 2 months. Then, slowly, I started filling them. A photograph I had taken of the pier at dusk. A framed print from a designer I admired. A small painting Denise found at a flea market in Long Beach. Abstract, blue and gold, that she said reminded her of me. Why? I had asked. Because it looks calm on the surface, but there is a lot happening underneath. I kept that painting above my desk. Work became an anchor in the best possible sense. My creative director offered me a lead role on a rebranding project for a nonprofit that worked with young women in underserved communities, and I threw myself into it with an energy that surprised even me. The project required long hours, detailed research, close collaboration with people whose stories were marked by resilience and reinvention. And every conversation I had with those women reminded me that starting over is not the same as starting from nothing. You carry everything you have learned. You carry every skill you have built. You carry the version of yourself that survived. Denise and I had dinner every Thursday. It became a tradition that neither of us formally established, but that both of us protected. Sometimes we talked about what had happened. More often, we did not. We talked about her work, about a man she had started seeing, about a road trip she wanted to take up the coast in the spring. We talked about food and movies and the particular absurdity of Los Angeles traffic. We talked about ordinary things, and the ordinariness of it was a gift I did not take for granted, because I had learned that ordinary life, real ordinary life, is something you can only fully appreciate after you have spent years living inside an extraordinary lie. Patricia called me in March to tell me the annulment had been finalized. The marriage between Sarah Mitchell and Ryan James Carter was officially dissolved, declared void from its inception. There was a financial settlement, modest but fair, reflecting my contributions during the years we had lived together. Patricia's voice on the phone was professional, measured, but at the end of the call she paused and said, "You handled this with more grace than most people could have managed. I hope you know that." I thanked her and hung up and sat at my kitchen table and waited to feel something. What came was not triumph. It was not relief either, exactly. It was more like the feeling of setting down a bag you have been carrying for so long that you had forgotten what your shoulders felt like without the weight. A quiet, physical unburdening. Ryan and I had not spoken since the night of the dinner. Through Patricia, I learned that he had retained his own attorney. He did not contest the annulment. Whether that was a strategic decision or something closer to surrender, I will never know. I heard from a former mutual acquaintance that he had left his position at the tech company and moved out of Santa Monica. Where he went, I did not ask. It was no longer my story to follow, but Megan's story continued, and it continued in a direction that mattered. Her attorney in Oregon had successfully filed for child support, backed by the financial records I had provided and the documentation of Ryan's income and assets. A court order was issued. For the first time in years, Ethan Ashford Carter had consistent, legally mandated financial support from his father. It was not everything Megan deserved. No court order can compensate for 6 years of absence, the lost moments, the questions a child asks, and for which there is no good answer. But it was something concrete. Something that acknowledged, in the language of the law, that Ethan existed, and that his father had obligations he could no longer ignore. Megan sent me a photograph in April. Ethan, on his first day at a new school, standing on a sidewalk in Portland with a backpack that was almost as big as he was, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile that made my chest ache in a way I was not prepared for. She had written underneath it, "He starts first grade today. New school, new start. Thank you, Sarah." I looked at that photograph for a long time. I did not know this child. I had never met him. But his existence was the thread that had unraveled everything. The truth that a confused old man had spoken aloud in a quiet room in Pasadena. The truth that had changed my life irrevocably. Ethan did not know any of that. He was just a boy with a new backpack, smiling because the world still felt full of possibility. I hoped it always would. I saved the photo. Then I closed my phone, put on my shoes, and drove to the pier. It was late afternoon. The sun was lowering toward the horizon, not setting yet but getting ready, the way it does in Southern California, taking its time, turning the sky through shades of gold and copper and pale rose, as though it wants to make sure you are watching before it goes. The pier was moderately crowded. Families and couples and tourists, and a man playing guitar near the railing with a case open at his feet, the sound mixing with the crash of waves below and the distant mechanical music of the amusement park rides at the far end. I walked to the end of the pier, leaned against the railing, felt the wind on my face, tasted the salt on my lips, smelled the ocean and the fried food from the vendors and the faint sweetness of sunscreen on someone passing behind me. The wood of the railing was warm under my hands, rough with age, solid. I thought about the last time I had stood here. It had been with Ryan, a Sunday afternoon during our first year together. And he had put his arm around me and said, "This is ours. This whole city. This whole life." I had believed him because I wanted to believe him, because the wanting was so strong it felt indistinguishable from truth. Standing here now, alone, I understood something that I could not have understood then. The city had never been ours. It had always been mine. The career I had built was mine. The friendships I had nurtured were mine. The strength I had discovered in the worst months of my life was mine. Ryan had occupied space in my story, significant space, painful space, but he had not authored it. I had. The ocean stretched out in front of me, vast and indifferent and beautiful. It did not care about my story. It did not care about anyone's story. It just kept moving, wave after wave after wave, following rhythms that had nothing to do with human decisions or human pain. There was something deeply comforting in that indifference. It reminded me that the world is larger than any single betrayal, larger than any single heartbreak, larger than the worst thing that has ever happened to you. I stood there until the sun touched the water. The sky turned deep orange, then violet, then the particular shade of blue that exists only in the minutes between day and night, a color that does not have a name, but that everyone recognizes. The guitar player behind me had switched to a slower song, something without words, just melody, simple and clear. I was not the woman who had arrived in Los Angeles at 25 with 2 suitcases and a dream shaped like a skyline. I was not the woman who had stood in a courthouse in a cream-colored dress and believed every promise. I was not the woman who had sat on a bathroom floor and cried over a county records printout. I was all of those women and none of them, the way a river is still a river even after it has changed course, even after it has cut new channels through the landscape, even after it has left behind the banks that once defined it. I turned away from the railing and walked back along the pier toward the lights of the city. My city. My steps were steady. The evening air was cool on my skin, and somewhere behind me the ocean kept doing what it has always done, moving forward, carrying everything and holding on to nothing, beginning again with every wave. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was not walking towards something someone else had designed for me. I was not walking away from something either. I was just walking, one step at a time, into a life that was honest and imperfect and entirely my own. And that, I realized, was more than enough. That was everything. If you have stayed with me through this whole story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever ignored a feeling that was trying to tell you something important? Have you ever stayed in a version of your life because leaving it felt like admitting you had been wrong? And if you have, what was the moment, the exact moment, when you decided that the truth was worth more than the comfort of not knowing? I do not have answers for you. I only have my own story, and now you have it too. If this meant something to you, if it made you feel seen or less alone, or just a little more willing to trust the voice inside you that knows when something is not right, then leave a like. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story. And if you want to keep listening, there is a playlist on your screen right now with more stories like this one, stories about real people making hard choices and finding their way through. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves.